June 30th, 2025, and it's D-Day in the Senate for Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill. I'm Ann Kim, contributing editor for the Washington Monthly, and I'm joined this morning by Paul Glastris, the monthly's editor-in-chief, politics editor Bill Scher, and executive editor for Digital, Matt Cooper. Hey, good morning, guys.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Right, so let's start with the One Big Beautiful Bill. It is President Trump's signature domestic policy legislation. It's called the One Big Beautiful Bill, and it's certainly big, but there are a lot of things in it that are certainly not beautiful. For one thing, the price tag. Legislation extends tax cuts from Trump's first term in 2017, which are largely tilted toward the wealthy. And according to the Congressional Budget Office, it will add $3.3 trillion to the deficit. Secondly, there are a lot of provisions in this legislation that make this One Big Beautiful Bill kind of one big betrayal of Trump's own base. And Bill, that is something that you wrote about last week and in weeks prior. So, can you talk a little bit about some of those bothersome provisions? And then I just want to ask everybody their favorite, loathsome provisions in this particular piece of legislation. So, Bill, if you could start us off.
Well, I mean, the thing that's just most devastating politically are the Medicaid cuts, and it's why Tom Tillis, he reached his breaking point, and finally dropped some truth bombs, on the Senate floor last night, saying that you're going to break your promise. You promised you weren't going to cut Medicaid, and this does that, and it's really mind-boggling. I mean, this bill is almost everything that Republicans say they weren't going to do. They didn't like omnibus bills, Christmas tree bills, shove everything into a bill, dead of night. We should have bills that are 9 pages long, and people should have days to have a chance to read them. None of that is happening. So there's all sorts. So I think we're still learning about stuff that's deep in the weeds of the bill, and we're doing the vote. So this is Monday morning that we're talking. We're on the cusp of the so-called vote-o-rama, where amendments may get added to the bill still, and Donald Trump's political success is in part because he broke ranks from the hyper-libertarian ethos of the party that was hell-bent on destroying New Deal, Great Society retirement security programs and saying, well, we're not going to touch Social Security, we're not going to touch Medicare, we're not going to touch Medicaid. Steve Bannon has said repeatedly as of late, a lot of MAGA on Medicaid. There was an understanding they were trying to. Josh Hawley has said this. This is a working class party. We can't take away people's Medicaid. And even though Hawley caved over the weekend and said he was going to vote for it, he, incongruently said, we can't keep doing this. Well, then don't do it. That's what you don't want to keep doing. Then vote no and don't do it. And despite all of these things that violate what they claim they want to do, they're going even the extra mile and severely damaging the filibuster to do it by essentially not allowing the parliamentarian to even judge whether they are violating the rules about budget reconciliation with this bill. That's budget reconciliation. Apologies for getting into the procedural weeds here. This is a way to circumvent filibuster so long as it is germane to the budget, not getting into other types of policy. And the way it's constructed now does not add to the deficit outside of the immediate 10-year window. So you can't actually increase the deficit within the first 10 years. But you're not supposed to after that, which is why you tend to get a lot of these sunset provisions. And what the Senate is about to do is wave a magic wand and say anything that is current policy but is sunsetting. If we extend the current policy, those numbers don't count. So there's all this trillions of dollars in Trump tax cuts from 2017 about to expire. Well, that's current policy, so we don't have to count that in our budget scoring in the out years. And the parliamentarian doesn't even get to look at that and decide whether that's on the level or not. And that's a massive loophole for any party in the future to run through and do whatever they want. That's going to have a big price tag on it. And so you're and they claim they weren't going to abolish the filibuster going into the session. So this is a kind of a de facto severe weakening of the filibuster, and for what? For probably one of the most unpopular kludges of a bill ever constructed. It's crazy.
Yeah, so let's dive into, what these kludges are. Um, so, Bill, you mentioned healthcare cuts. CBO predicts that about 11.6 million Americans are going to lose coverage, and there's all sorts of cuts here and there. A big piece of that are work requirements in Medicaid that are really work reporting requirements. Really, it's going to be people who are unable to comply with the complexity of the paperwork that's going to cause them to be out of compliance technically. So that is a major way in which the working class, that is Trump's base, is being betrayed. Same goes with SNAP work requirements there. Uh, Paul, Matt, would you guys like to weigh in on the things that you notice in this bill that really stand out to you, in particular as betrayals of Trump's promise to the folks?
Yeah, let me jump in here. And you point out the way that the GOP is achieving its savings from Medicare, from food programs like SNAP, um, is essentially to overwhelm individuals with paperwork. Right? You now somebody who works 2 or 3 jobs intermittently, is just trying to get by, has to go racing around to different employers to get documents that, well, I worked for these 3 months, but not these 3 months because I was a contract. And for a lot of people, it's just going to be screw it. I can't. I don't have the jam, the time, the knowledge, the whatever to constantly be giving the government paperwork. I'll just go without health insurance. It's the same with food stamps. There's this whole talk about abundance liberals who think, Democrats are hurting their country and their political aspirations by being overly regulatory and rule bound. This is the greatest increase in paperwork for Trump's base that I can think of. And on top of that, the Biden administration had a program that was utterly brilliant. And you've written about it. We've talked about it. It was called direct filing. It would remove the need for millions of working class and middle class people to file income taxes because the government has all your wage and income information. It just sends you a piece of paper. If it's fine, you sign it, you're done. That's being destroyed in this one big beautiful bill. So it's just a deluge of extra regulations and paperwork for Trump's base.
And one thing that is going to happen actually is that a lot of states are going to be hiring contractors to help them keep track of all this paperwork, because that's exactly what happened after the 1996 welfare reform when you had work requirements. And that is, in fact, what happened in Georgia, where they began work requirements for Medicaid. They hired a contractor and they spent tens of millions of dollars to track down people and threaten them with noncompliance and stuff like that. Tons of people lost coverage, nobody found work, and the program was a bust. So it'll be an all-around failure, these work reporting requirements that are going to be instituted in some fashion by this bill.
And another aspect of the sort of your theme, Anne, of this bill being kind of tilted hard against Trump's working class base, or the working class. There are aspects of it that Trump put in, and the Senate and House, I think also the House, have protected. One of them is a tax break on overtime pay. Another is a tax break on tipped income. They're going to talk a lot about that. But Bill wrote a piece last week about how this package of bills, as well as Trump's budget, actually cuts funding for people to get vocational training, right? This was Trump's big, this is how Trump has offered to help people get ahead through apprenticeships and so forth. And those are being cut.
Yeah, Bill, if you could talk about your piece a little bit, that'd be great.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, Donald Trump. We've seen in the past few months that Donald Trump is hell bent on kneecapping higher education, liberal arts education, particularly. sort of name brand Ivy League institutions like Harvard and Columbia, threats to pull research grant funding. You're not allowed to have international students who pay full tuition. Some of these things have been stymied by courts, at least temporarily, but there's clearly a war being waged on higher education, and the subtext of that is sometimes overt text, is we shouldn't be helping bougie 4-year liberal arts degrees. These things don't, they're money going to wealthy families, and these degrees don't even pay off at the end of the day. They don't lead to really good paying jobs where you use your hands and make things. Who needs to subsidize a bunch of philosophy majors? And there's been promises to bolster vocational education, apprenticeships. Trump had an executive order a couple months ago saying he was going to help support 1 million apprenticeships. But look at what's actually happening on the ground, and you're not seeing the money match the rhetoric. Quite the opposite. Whether you're looking at what's in this one big beautiful bill, whether you're looking at what's in Trump's budget, which is not law, it's a proposal, but supposed to guide the congressional appropriators. There's some lip service given to it, but for the most part, in the budget, they consolidate 11 workforce training programs, consolidated into a Make America Skills Again grant. But the total number of dollars is far less. It drops from about what was 4.5 billion a couple years ago to a little below 3 billion now, and so it's going in the opposite direction as far as funding these programs. And the One Big Beautiful Bill tries to slap an endowment tax on higher education. It was intended to try to offset that with what's called a short-term Pell Grant or workforce Pell Grant, where you can use Pell Grant money for short-term vocational programs. But just overnight, we've learned that the Senate parliamentarian actually knocked that out of the bill. It wasn't anywhere close to compensating for the loss in Pell Grant money. And some Pell Grant money was already going to vocational programs anyway. So a lot of it is robbing Peter to pay Paul. But now they came, what modest positive that you could take from that is helping the vocational education is not even going to be in there now unless they can find a way to rework the language. So it's another case of Trump, saying nice words. When you look at the policies, it's all about nickel and diming folks and punishing people more than trying to help people.
Yeah.
Precisely. Well, look, one that is part of his base, but he's not treating like part of his base, is renewable energy. I mean, this bill really goes after renewable energy. The Republican line has sort of been all of the above. We support nuclear. We want to drill, baby, drill. We're okay with wind and solar. That's been their position. We don't like all the sort of Biden, Obama year subsidies of green energy, but we're not against windmills. That's the basic Republican line. Although Trump himself deviates from it often with his windmills will kill you stuff and how it's ruining his golf courses. How can you possibly have an electric plane? Because if there's a cloud, it'll crash. It'll lose all its power. He's unaware of this invention called the battery. Well, this bill really not only goes after sort of a Biden era expansion of green energy programs and the Inflation Reduction Act, but it goes much farther in a much more punitive way towards renewable energies, and some of that got slipped in pretty late in the game. And now, why is this part of Trump's base? Well, Texas is really emerging as as kind of the Saudi Arabia of wind. I mean, it's perfect for it with the cold air coming off the Rockies and the warm air coming up from the Gulf, and there's a lot of wind. It's the reason you get a lot of tornadoes in the Panhandle. It's the same reason you get a lot of wind there. That whole energy sector is going to take a big hit, and everybody involved in the trades, construction and such, they're going to take a hit in solar, which is really come way, way down in price. So this is his base may not see it as going after them directly as things, but it really is going to come after his base.
There's actually a CNN story that walks you through how much higher electric rates will be over the course of the next 10 years in different states. And Wyoming is at the top, and it's all these red states because they're literally taxing renewable energy.
Exactly.
And they're doing it in a way that's kind of diabolical. They're saying, well, if you have any Chinese parts in your solar array, then you are taxed and you don't get any credits. You know, sort of one screw, right, in a big giant solar farm, and we tax you at this exorbitant rate. Of course, you know, screws in oil rigs don't count, but and so all this, as Matt said, this is where the big reductions in electric prices are happening. Oh, and by the way, they go after geothermal and nuclear too. It's not just wind and solar, all those
exactly.
you know.
We had a very good piece online about by James Hassett about Trump's war on renewables. That was about 3 weeks ago. The bill has gotten so much worse.
Yeah.
In the 3 weeks since then.
Yeah, and so again, this is going to be punishing all of these, you know, rural working class people throughout the country, especially in the Mountain West, are going to see their electric bills go up. And it's the bigger problem is it's, you know, that's a political problem. It's bad for individuals. It is putting the U.S. immensely behind the competitiveness with China and the rest of the world, because without good, inexpensive electricity, we can't fire AI. You know, the crypto people are not going to like it because they need cheap energy. So it's hard to understand how they are doing this, and I can't imagine it's going to be to their benefit politically or our benefit as a nation.
I also want to point out that this Senate bill is immensely cruel to immigrants, like just further extending the cruelty of the Trump administration. The three provisions in particular that I just want to point out. One is an excise tax on foreign remittances. This is how immigrants send money home to their families with a wire through Western Union. They're going to tax that, and they hope to raise $10 billion. Which in the grand scheme of things, compared to $3.3 trillion deficit, is nothing but an immense hardship on immigrant families. Number two, they're going to reduce the amount of federal money that goes toward paying for emergency care for immigrants who need to go to the emergency room because they've been in a terrific accident or are facing, you know, some horrific condition. They're going to take away $28 billion from hospitals to help pay for immigrants in crisis, medical crisis in that way. And then third, they're actually spending nearly $160 for border enforcement, including $45 billion to for immigrant detention centers and $45 billion for the border wall. So it's
just if you focus just, Anne, on the tax on remittances, I don't know how many tens of millions of Americans who are immigrants send remittances. I certainly know some. I bet you know some. It is a huge reason that immigrants come to this country in order to earn the money to help their families back home. And oh, by the way, a lot of them, once they've sent the remittances, they go back and they live in the homes that they built with their work in the United States. This is the group that, you know, everyone is saying that the MAGA and the GOP is doing better at, or stealing the votes of immigrants from the Democrats. Increasing this tax seems politically insane to me.
Well, I can understand. I mean, they're not afraid to scapegoat immigrants. I mean, that's really part and parcel of, you know, the MAGA strategy. And I've written, as you all know, that as well as that might have polled in the election, once the overreach occurs, there comes the political backlash, and we've seen that over the past few months. But I'm not shocked that they want to double down on trying to scapegoat immigrants in the bill. It's more shocking to me, just as a political analyst, of all the other things we've talked about today that would affect voters within the Republican base in ways that were not advertised, uh, and maybe not even
But they were
intentionally. I mean,
dismissed,
this is so
Mhm.
dismissed as unjustified fears. We're
right,
not going to cut Medicare. We're not going to
right.
cut Medicare.
Exactly. And so I mean the Medicaid stuff I think is more transparently dishonest. They know full well what they're doing. Maybe some of the other things might just be like going after nuclear, for example. It might just be they're slapping some stuff together because they're so desperate to find savings
I think that's a
because they
lot of it.
have fiscal scolds in their party that they have to appease, even though they're not going to come anywhere close to this bill being deficit neutral, but they're just trying to do something, some fingers in the dike, doing it last minute, and not really fully understanding what the policy consequence is going to be or the political consequence is going to be. I mean, it's why you do. I mean, not to say every omnibus bill is bad. I don't hold that position,
Mhm.
but to the extent that there's an argument against doing them, this is why. Slapdash policy making, on a compressed timetable where the ideas aren't fully vetted, that's how you make bad policy.
There's a poll out by the Washington Center for Equitable Growth, where they walk a group of people surveyed. First, they ask them in general about the bill, about the one big beautiful bill, and that they're, as we've seen, it matches other polls. It's 30, 40% approve, 50, 60% don't approve. But then they put in some of the substance about who gets hurt, Medicaid cuts and so forth. And even among Republicans, support for the bill plummets to something like 11%. Now, it's just one poll, one exercise. I can't
Mhm.
vouch for its methodology. But, I'm wondering, I asked the gang, what this means politically if and when this bill passes, what's going to happen to
I mean,
what
every poll for this bill has been terrible. Every single one. It doesn't matter how you characterize it. If you just use the name, one big beautiful bill polls badly. You talk about the provisions. I mean, some of them poll well. Extend my tax cut polls well, but
Right.
the Medicaid cuts don't, and a lot of other things don't. And there's all sorts of things that may well detonate in the near future. And Republicans might even be fully aware what all those things are. I mean, the last reconciliation bill that Trump got passed in 2017 was the tax cut bill. Tax cuts. I mean, these should be gimmies politically.
Right.
And Democrats did quite a good job tarring that as really a giveaway to the rich, and it did not help them keep the House. Republicans keep the House in 2018. Democrats took the House. This bill seems exponentially more politically dangerous than that bill was.
Mhm.
And it's already fairly easy for Democrats to take back the House because the margins are so narrow. Now you've lost Tom Tillis, someone not necessarily the linchpin for Republicans keeping the Senate, but Democrats would at least need North Carolina to get to a net of 4. And now that's going to be easier for Democrats. And it's because he thought this bill was so toxic, he could not in good conscience put his name on it.
Right.
The warning signs are just so deafening. If I was a Republican, I'd say, you know what? I don't have to do this. Don't make me do this.
Yeah, I think
Well,
states that red or purplish states that took the Medicaid expansions of Obamacare, like North Carolina, we got a lot of more people in the system because they had Democratic governors or sometimes Republican governors were for it, like Kasich in Ohio back in the aughts. They're going to feel it, right? I mean, their rural hospitals are going to take the hit pretty quickly. So I think, in a place that's always kind of been troglodyte and didn't do the expansions despite all the incentives for a governor to do it. I think in a weird way, they've been in such bad shape, they may not notice the fall off in quite the same.
There's two other provisions that, to your point, Bill, about things that are going to detonate. I noticed in the master list that the New York Times has compiled that there is the elimination of the de minimis exemption for goods coming from overseas. So no more Shein hauls, all those tax-free packages of cheaper stuff coming from overseas that actually a lot of middle-income people rely upon. That's out the window. That's supposed to raise $39 billion. Again, drop in the bucket compared to the cost of the bill. But a big bomb here is eliminating Medicaid eligibility for long-term care for people whose homes are worth more than $1 million. So it's a dirty secret that Medicaid is a de facto long-term care provider in the United States for middle-class Americans, and you're allowed to live in your home if it's worth below a certain amount, and that's especially helpful for spouses who are taking care of someone who needs Medicaid long-term care. Now, making the home equity limit only $1 million was really going to hurt a lot of people, particularly on the coasts, but maybe a lot of folks who've been living in their houses for 40 years and their home equity has gone up over time. It could potentially plunge a lot of people into a situation where they have to sell their home and a spouse may be homeless in order to qualify for the Medicaid long-term care. That's another policy that I think has not been thought through, but maybe they thought it was easy money and the consequences are going to bite them in the future.
And this is all being done in order to extend tax cuts that are insanely focused on the top 5%, the top 1%, the top 0.01%. And again, these are extensions of already existing but sunsetted tax cuts. So the benefit, the political benefit for Republicans isn't there. And yet the insane inequality of it is there for Democrats to talk about. And, things like the estate tax, it's now a couple with $30 million in assets or below isn't subject to the estate tax. It's pass-through money for passive investments. This is 70, 80, 90% of it going to the top 1%. And for that top 1%, they're not getting that much extra. They're just having the tax breaks they've enjoyed continue on. So politically, it as Bill said, it's infinitely more toxic for the Republicans than that 2017 bill, I would think.
Mm-hmm. So Trump has sent this arbitrary deadline of July 4th to pass this bill through. This is just the Senate version we've been talking about. It's got to go back to the House and all of that. No doubt because he wants the pageantry of signing away the nation's future on its birthday, July 4th. Very quickly before we turn to another topic, what do you guys think are the odds that they are going to get there? The GOP is going to pass something and have something on Trump's desk by that July 4th deadline?
Well, I've been a tower of jello about this because I can see it going either way. I mean, generally, I think they get it because nobody wants to, as I said last time, nobody wants to be, standing over the body with a gun and be responsible for having killed it. Trump's too powerful in the party to cross him that way. On the other hand, I think if having to send it back to the House, I thought the best shot was just for the Senate to suck it up and find a way to get this through the House bill. Clearly, they couldn't do it. The opposition was too widespread. But now the House folks see it as a shit sandwich. They don't want to eat it, and I think it's going to be pretty tough. I wouldn't venture to predict, but it's tougher than it should be.
And I'm not even clear it's going to pass the Senate. I don't want to make predictions, and we'll know soon enough. So we've already lost Rand Paul and Tom Tillis. You'd have to lose two more. The Alaska sweetener that was going to help bring Murkowski along got knocked out by the parliamentarian. I mean, I know maybe they can slip it back in, but that might lose her. Susan Collins has been squishy, and Susan Collins is always squishy. And then obviously putting your money on Susan Collins is a great way to lose money. But she is up for re-election in 2026. And I just saw a Maine poll where her numbers were terrible.
Against Paula Page.
Right. And she did break ranks, for the Obamacare reconciliation, attempt to repeal Obamacare in 2017. So she's not averse to doing it. So it's possible this doesn't get out of the Senate this week. And if it does, as Matt said, you have some House people who are recalling at the deeper Medicaid cuts, and that may take some time to either bring them along if they can be brought along. So I still think Friday seems tough to me to get this done by.
So let's turn to New York City, where a 33-year-old assemblyman named Zorman Mamdani defeated former Governor Andrew Cuomo in the Democratic primary for mayor. So Mamdani is a self-described democratic socialist, and his platform focused on the city's affordability crisis. And Democrats nationally are beginning to see, or a lot of Democrats nationally are seeing this race as a litmus test of sorts for the party and kind of this harbinger of where the party is headed. Do you guys also see it that way, or do you see something else going on here with this matchup?
Well, I think it's not a leading indicator that you're going to see a lot of Democratic Socialist candidates who started, Students for Justice in Palestine chapters in their campuses, the way Mandani did, running in Ohio and elsewhere across the country. I mean, I still think the general hydraulic pressure in the party is towards people like Mikey Sherrill, who is the Democratic nominee for governor in New Jersey, and Abigail Spanberger in Virginia. But it is telling of a lot of anger in the party about the mainstream Democrats, the leadership not being combative enough with Trump, being much more open to more radical solutions on cost cutting. Mondani ran on rent freeze, which is actually not that radical. New York mayors invoke it all the time, but he had other things like, free bus transportation and putting the city in the grocery store business by opening some essentially nonprofit grocery stores as a pilot, but with an eye to expanding it later. So I think there is an openness to more, aggressive lefty solutions, and I think it's also a lesson too that um, you know, embracing an anti-Israeli position is not the kiss of death. And certainly, I think in big cities now, but also elsewhere in the Democratic primary electorate, which has been very focused on Gaza and very upset about Israel's response to the massacre it endured on October 7th. So I look. I think this is presented a pickle, right? You've seen sort of non-endorsements so far from the leadership, and both the Senate Democratic leader and the House Democratic leader are from Brooklyn. In fact, they live so close they share a Starbucks. So it's a small world up there. They haven't quite endorsed. Now it's somewhat appropriate now because Mondani hasn't formally gotten the Democratic nomination yet because the ranked choice voting system they've got up there, but he will get it, and then they'll be faced with a choice. I suspect a lot of them are going to do, I support Democratic nominees, but boy, I disagree with this guy a lot. And, but they have to be mindful. I mean, Schumer, if he chooses to run again in 2026, is almost certainly going to face a primary challenge from the left, from Democrats who feel he's been too accommodating of Trump. I don't think that rap's really fair, but it's sticking. So look, I think, and then of course the other thing with Mondani is, can he possibly be challenged in the fall? New York has a tendency to vote for independents and Republicans. They elected John Lindsay in the '60s, then a Republican congressman who switched parties later in his career. They elected Rudy Giuliani for 2 terms. They elected Mike Bloomberg as a Republican, an independent, and a Democrat, all three. So, it's not impossible Mondani just gets beaten up between now and the end of the year, but it's also hard to see Mayor Adams prevailing. He's staying on the ballot on his own independent line. Right now, the Republican nominee is going to be Curtis Sliwa, the sort of, kind of a laughable, also ran forever, who founded the Guardian Angels more than 40 years ago. So it's hard to see who could defeat him, who's actually going to be on the ballot. Now there's going to be an effort by the anti-Mondani forces and the full Wall Street freakout. I mean, I think there is a disproportionate freakout going on, especially among wealthy New Yorkers who are convinced that Mondani is a Maoist who's going to come and send the Red Guard into Merrill Lynch, and they can't get to Palm Beach soon enough. I don't think that's really the issue here. All mayors are tempered by the bond market, and we saw that with Bernie Sanders, the socialist mayor of Burlington, Vermont, for decades, right? Small city, but it had to borrow and had an excellent bond rating, and you got to keep you may be a democratic socialist, but you live in a capitalist world, and you have to keep Standard and Poor's and Moody's happy too. So I think there will be, I think the smarter play for Democrats are, we admire your energy, your youthful vigor. We hear your message of discontent. Here are good ideas. By the way, that is also a place where the Washington Monthly and places that are nonpartisan, but also espousing political ideas all the time can be helpful too.
Well, I think that there is this legitimate tension between the center and the left, even if this particular race is not it's kind of on the extremes of that. And the big question is whether the Democrats do need to be populist in their own way. Maybe you take Mamdani seriously, but not literally with some of his promises, to the electorate. And then on the other side of it is the more centrist position of trying to be the moderate alternative to Trump's extremism. And Matt, you point out in places where, like Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger, they are the rational alternative to the crazy person who's running on the MAGA side of the aisle. How do you guys see Democrats resolving this tension in the future? And where do you think the party's ultimately going to land?
Well, I'm not looking at Mamdani's policies. I don't think the math adds up. I think it's going to be extremely difficult for him to deliver on his promises. I have great suspicion about this, but if you look at where the Democratic Party is and what this says about that, he ran up huge voting among young people who are furious at their elders for delivering the world in which they live, can't afford a home, aren't earning enough money, don't see upward mobility, and believe that sort of free market solutions to problems have led to this, and he's their guy. And that is true in the party as a whole. And there is a huge battle brewing within the party about which is what reforms have to happen for Democrats to not only solve fundamental economic problems, but win back the voters that they've been losing. Young people is part of it. We saw that in 2024, a drop off in youth voting really helps explain why Trump won. Working class voters who are not Democrats, right? They all are feeling the same thing. And you have abundance liberals who are, talking about things like high housing costs, but want to get at it through a kind of deregulatory agenda. And, the deregulatory agenda, some parts of it might make sense, but it's kind of what got us here in the beginning, right? And then you have the sort of neo-Brandeisian Lena Khan wing of the party. Lena Khan was there when Mamdani won, and very noticeably there. Zephyr Teachout was noticeably former head of the FTC, former Washington Monthly writer. So there's parts of Mamdani's agenda that are literally weaving between the abundance liberal groups and the anti-monopoly groups. He, for instance, wants to cut the regulations and prices for startup businesses and expand a program to help entrepreneurs make their way through the scores of agencies that you need to get licenses. And that's the kind of thing that could bring the different wings of the Democratic Party nationally together. So I find it completely fascinating, even though I have some doubts about his ability to pull off what he says he can do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So very quickly, let's go back to the war. Let's not forget about the war in Iran and what the U.S. bombing last week, seems long ago already, accomplished, or rather failed to accomplish, perhaps. The Washington Post reported yesterday that U.S. intelligence officials intercepted a call between Iranian officials talking about how the attack was, quote, less devastating than they expected. And then the New York Times reported that, according to the United Nations chief nuclear inspector, Iran could, in fact, be enriching uranium again in just a matter of months, quote unquote. And of course, both of these assessments contradict Trump's pronouncement that the program was, quote, obliterated. So, Paul and Matt, you've actually both written recently about the consequences of this attack, and in particular, the consequences of a failed attack on Iran's nuclear
Yeah,
capacity. So, can each of you elaborate quickly on why
sure.
things might not be worse than if we'd never attacked at all?
Sure. Well, first, I'm agnostic on these assessments. Brett McGurk, the veteran diplomat who was in Obama, and Trump, and Biden administrations, has been much more sanguine about the devastation wrought by the Israeli bombing on Iranian nuclear sites than other people, and some other people in the intel world are. So I don't think we totally know that it was a total bust. I mean, it's certainly possible, and certainly the first preliminary assessment from the Defense Intelligence Agency was as such, but I don't think we totally know where they're at. So let's be agnostic. What we do know is what happened before the Israelis started bombing Iran, and the U.S. joined in all the fun, which is that Trump dropped out of the joint agreement between not just the United States and Iran, but also Russia, China, France, Great Britain, and Germany. All signed this agreement to limit Iran's nuclear program extensively, put an unprecedented inspection on the ground. And as the New York Times finally got around to a piece yesterday saying, oh, we might not have had to bomb these places if we hadn't dropped out of this regime for 8 years. But we did, and that gave Iran a huge break in its nuclear
And by we you mean Donald.
aspirations.
And by we you mean
By we
Donald
mean
Trump.
Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump unilaterally decided to just scuttle
Right.
this agreement, and that seriously screwed things up for the efforts at nuclear non-proliferation. Right now, there's no real incentive for people not to seek nuclear weapons around the world. Frankly, I think the lesson, if you're a would-be dictator, and this is what I wrote in the Washington Monthly, the lesson of the last 25 years is if you don't have a nuke, you're going to get invaded. Whether you're Ukraine, who gave them up, Libya, who gave up their weapons of mass destruction, Syria, that had their nuclear aspirations bombed by the Israelis, the Iranians who never quite got to a nuke. If you don't have one, you're going to get rolled. If you do have one, like North Korea, which has at least 60, according to our estimates, then no one is going to even think of invading. So I think we're in a worse place because of Donald Trump, for sure.
If I can just add to that, when Obama had his Iran deal, and the Obama Iran deal was Iran, you can enrich uranium for civilian energy purposes, but there are international inspectors that are going to come in and make sure you're not using it for nuclear weapons. Republicans who criticized the deal said, we don't trust these inspections, and the deal had a sunset. So they would say, well, Iran could get a bomb, when the deal's over. This guarantees they're going to have a bomb. Of course, that wasn't obviously the intent here. The idea was that you'd reassess things at the sunset point. You'd hope that you'd build on the deal and expand it. You wouldn't just say, forget it, go have a bomb now. The whole point is for them to not have a bomb. But that was the argument. And so Trump comes in. So Trump scotches the deal in 2018, comes back in 2025, tries to have a new deal. Now, all of a sudden, deals are a great idea. And now his deal would take the Obama strategy one step farther. He offered you can have enriched uranium, Iran, but it's enriched out of the country, and then we'll import it to you, which Iran, didn't want. I mean, if he could have gotten that deal, great. I'd be happy with it. But he certainly tried very hard to negotiate after that point. Drops the bombs, drops the bunker buster bombs, claims the whole thing program's obliterated. Almost nobody agrees with that. And the debate seems to be the Defense Intelligence Assessment was that set back months. We just heard from the UN's inspectors. They say months. Lindsey Graham, who's one of the biggest Iran hawks out there, said it was years, not months. Let's say Lindsey Graham was right and it's years. How is that any different from the conservative Republican critique of the Obama deal? If all you're buying yourself is years, and they could, and as Matt just said, now Iran has even greater incentive to get Obama as fast as it can, and they apparently move their enriched uranium so they can still keep the program afloat. So not only I think the best argument you can make is that this is as good as what you had with Obama, but even worse because the incentives are now all wrong for what happens from this point going forward.
And I'll just add one thing. In an interview I did with a source last week in the Washington Monthly, this person pointed out, first of all, the United States has a very long history with bunker buster bombs. We tried to make them work for a couple of decades, and in the after the DIA preliminary report came out, the Joint Chiefs of Staff had, went on to great lengths to explain that program. We never could make it work. We just never could find the ordinance that could break through the laws of physics and destroy bunkers dug deep into mountains. That's why this preliminary report from the DIA kind of makes sense, because we have no evidence. These bunker busters have never been used in the real world, and now we have the report from the Washington Post, some very good intel reporters, that they have intercepted phone calls from Iranian officials saying they're kind of surprised that these bunker busters didn't do more damage. So the point my source was making is now the whole world knows, if it's the case with these bunker busters, collapsed the entrances of these bunkers, but didn't do damage deep inside. The whole world now knows that they're kind of duds. And that while the world didn't know that, we had leverage over the North Koreas, or at least some leverage over the North Koreas and others who might want to hide nuclear weapons fabrications. Now we've lost that leverage, and we've lost it with Iran too. It doesn't mean that these attacks didn't do damage to other aspects of the potential Iranian nuclear production, but the bunker busters, we'll see. But more and more, it looks like they didn't work.
Yep. Okay. Final question, as always. Anything else you guys are watching for in the following week? Talked at length about the one big beautiful bill, so we know that's on the table. But what else is on the horizon for you guys to look out for?
Well, I know you're doing a separate show on the Supreme Court, but I will say that in the wake of the court clamping down on trial court judges being able to enforce orders nationwide, I think the question is, how wild does the administration go on enforcing its claim that his executive order eliminated the century-old birthright citizenship, century-and-a-half-old birthright citizenship rights enshrined in the 14th Amendment and validated by every Supreme Court and Congress since then. And my guess is pretty wild. I think they're just going to treat it like they got the green light, not a yellow light, and go for it. So I'm going to watch to see that.
Yeah, I would double down on that assessment. I think the more we learn about a series of Supreme Court, end of the session decisions tilting in favor of honestly, an autocratic vision of the Constitution, the more that's going to be an issue that is people are going to discuss, and it's going to feed into the political debate as well as disrupt the lives of millions of Americans. So I look forward, Ann, to watching your conversation with the great Garrett Epps, the Washington Monthly's legal editor and others.
I'll say something else court related. I think we're on retirement watch. Might Alito or Thomas say this is the time? Republican Senate. I've done my tour of duty. This would seem to be the right window for it if they were thinking along those lines.
And for my part, I'll say that the tariffs are due to return potentially next Wednesday because the 90-day pause on the Liberation Day tariffs actually expires. So the question is whether next Tuesday is going to be Taco Tuesday and Trump backs down again. So we'll see what happens over the next week. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm Ann Kim, contributing editor Washington Monthly, joined today by editor-in-chief Paul Glastris, politics editor Bill Scher, and executive editor Digital Matt Cooper. Have a great week, guys, and see you next Monday.
Bye.
Thank you.